Hello there, geometry friends. We are starting our next unit, Unit 6. This is going to be on lines, parallel lines, perpendicular lines, applications of lines, and distance from a point to a line, partitioning lines, all sorts of stuff with lines. So let's get right into it. What you're supposed to remember from your world of algebra is y equals mx plus b. And you're supposed to remember that the m represents the slope, which is how you would move on the graph from one point to the other point. The slope is also how you would do rise over run. And when you graph, you should always run to the right. And your rise will be positive, it goes up. If your slope is negative, it goes down. There was a formula for slope, change in y over change in x. Remember from our quadrilateral unit when we were proving opposite sides are parallel, we would use our slope formula to show that the parallel lines have equal slopes, perpendicular lines have negative reciprocal slopes, and anything in between, two lines that intersect will just have two slopes that are different. So let's get doing some review. Write the equation of the line passing through the point 6, 3 and parallel to y equals 1/3 x minus 7. What you should remember is that parallel lines have equal slopes. So knowing that the slope of the given line is 1/3, because it's the number next to the x, we are going to use the y equals mx plus b form of the equation of a line, which is called point slope form. I'm sorry, this is slope intercept form, because you see the slope and you see the y-intercept. So it's called slope intercept form. We're going to use the slope intercept form with the given slope so it stays parallel and the new point so we can find the correct y-intercept. So we're going to take the y-coordinate from our point, which is 3, the parallel slope, which is 1/3, the x-coordinate from our point, which is 6, and we are going to find the y-intercept of b. So do a little bit of algebra. 1/3 of 6 is 2. Subtract 2 from both sides, and the y-intercept is b. Now that we know the y-intercept, and we know it's parallel to the given line, so we also know its slope, we can write the equation, and slope intercept form. So that is something you're supposed to be able to do from your algebra days. Something that we did earlier this year, the diagonals of a parallelogram bisect each other. So that means they have the same midpoint. So why don't you remember your midpoint formula and apply it to the 2 points that are given, find the midpoint, and then come back. Just in case you forgot your midpoint formula. The midpoint is simply the average of the two x values, so you add them up and divide by 2, and you would average the two y values, add them up and divide by 2. So apply that to the numbers we have. It'd be 6 plus -10 divided by 2 for the x-coordinates, and 3 plus 39 divided by 2 for the y-coordinates. So that leaves us with -4/2 for the x's and 42/2 for the y's, giving us a midpoint of -221. There's your midpoint. Okay, some more review. What is true about the slopes of perpendicular lines? Perpendicular lines have opposite reciprocal slopes. So if line L has a slope of -4/5, then the slope of the line perpendicular to that would be +5/4. Opposite reciprocal slopes, the opposite part refers to the negative turning to a positive, positive, negative, or opposite. Reciprocal means you will switch the numerator and the denominator. Again, perpendicular lines have opposite reciprocal slopes. So let's write the perpendicular slope for each of the given ones. You probably don't need me much for this, so why don't you pause the video, fill these in real quick, and then come back, check, and we will move on. I'm guessing you had a pretty easy time with this, so you can check your answers as I'm talking to you about the last two, G and H. An undefined slope is when you would have a number in the numerator, but a zero in the denominator. So when you take the reciprocal of that, the zero that was in the denominator gets moved to the numerator, in which case your new value is just zero. So the opposite reciprocal of an undefined slope would be a slope of zero, and vice versa. The opposite reciprocal of a zero slope would be undefined. Technically, the original slope, if it is equal to zero, would have a zero in the numerator with a number in the denominator. So when you take the reciprocal, those switch and the zero ends up in the denominator, making your fraction undefined. That would be when you have vertical lines and horizontal lines. Vertical lines have slopes that are undefined. Horizontal lines have slopes that are zero, and we know vertical lines are perpendicular to horizontal lines. So speaking of vertical and horizontal lines, let's graph the line x equals 3 and y equals 2 and explain whether or not the lines are perpendicular. So let's first make sure you can graph these correctly. So the line x equals 3 means no matter what y value you pick, the x value is always 3. So x equals 3 is actually a vertical line through the x value of 3. The line y equals 2 means no matter what x value you pick, your y value is always 2. So that is a horizontal line with a slope of 0. Your vertical line has a slope that is undefined. These are perpendicular because they have opposite reciprocal slopes. One's vertical and one's horizontal. So they have opposite reciprocal slopes. They are perpendicular. Now the next question asks, does the line x equals 3 bisect the line y equals 2? And the answer is no. You cannot bisect a line. A line technically goes forever in both directions, so there's never a middle because there's no ends. You can only bisect a line segment. So it's kind of a trick question. All right, next one. Graph the equation 4x minus 4. So let's see if you can remember your slope, y-intercept, and how to get the equation into a picture onto a graph. So your y-intercept is the value where your line crosses the y-axis. That'll be our number -4. And then our slope technically is 4 or 4 over 1. That means you're going to rise 4, run to the right 1. So up 4 to the right 1, up 4, up out of space. If you're counting up boxes, do it a couple times. Once you run out of space, you can stop. You can try to go backwards to get more points. That's fine. What you want to do is make sure you use a straight edge. I actually have the ability of the draw program making a line for me. The more accurate your line, the easier the work will be as we go through this unit, because we're going to have to find specific points of intersection. So we want to make sure we plot all the points that we can plot using our slope that covers the graph. Graph and write the equation of the line perpendicular to the given line and having the same y-intercept. So perpendicular lines have opposite reciprocal slopes, and if it has the same y-intercept, then it's going to be a very similar equation, except for the slope of 4, it's going to be a slope of -1/4, but same y-intercept. So we're supposed to graph and write the equation. So this slope is down 1 to the right 4. Down 1 to the right 4 off the graph. So then I can go back to my y-intercept, and now I can count backwards. And again, off the page. So I'm going to use my straight edge to connect my points. And depending on the grid that is being used, the lines might not look like they're perpendicular. If the grid is not perfect squares, then your perpendicular lines might not look like they exactly form a right angle. That doesn't mean it's not true. That's why we have the numbers. Can we find the midpoint of either line? The answer is no. Lines do not have midpoints. Lines go on forever, so they do not have midpoints. Okay, next it says graph the segment with endpoints -4, 3, and 2, -3. So a segment is when I plot 2 points and then connect them. So it has endpoints, specific starting location and ending location. Technically, it doesn't matter which one you consider the start and which one you consider the end, but usually we just go left to right. Can you find the midpoint of this segment? Yes, because it is a segment. We can use our formula, the midpoint formula, or just count on the graph and figure out what our midpoint is exactly supposed to be. So I'm going to go ahead and use the formula. So it's x1 plus x2. Remember, you're just adding the two x values, dividing by 2, adding the two y values, and dividing by 2. So this gives us a midpoint, which you might even be able to see from the graph. Our midpoint's at -1, 0. Graph and write the equation of the line perpendicular to the given segment passing through the point 2, 5. So if it's perpendicular to the given segment, that means I need to find the slope of the given segment. So counting from the graph, we can tell that this given segment has a slope of -1. So our perpendicular line would then have a slope of +1, and it's going to pass through the point 2, 5. So there's the point 2, 5 here, and my slope is going to be +1. So what I can do is just use my slope and the point that I know to plot a bunch of points on my graph so I know how to line up my straight edge, in this case my drawing program, and get a nice accurate picture created. Now it does ask us to write the equation, and since I have the graph drawn, I can use my work from my graph to find the y-intercept, and I know that my slope was +1, and I can see from the y-intercept on the graph that my y-intercept is +3, so there's my equation. Does the line from part B bisect the line from part A? And the answer is no, because it does not pass through the midpoint. They are perpendicular, but they are not bisectors. So it is possible to have a line perpendicular to another line, but not passing through the midpoint, so it doesn't bisect it. Perpendicular doesn't mean bisect. They are different things. All right, next section. Find the slope of the segment with endpoints 2, 5, and 0, -3. So here we get to use our slope formula. All right, so use your slope formula. Change in y over change in x, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Pause the video, find the slope. So we end up with a slope of 4. Now, use your midpoint formula and find the midpoint. All right, so pause the video, find the midpoint, then come back. And here we are, we have our midpoint at 1, 1. Now write the equation of the line perpendicular to the segment from part A and passing through the midpoint found in part B. So we are going to use our perpendicular slope. So our original slope from part A was 4. That would be the same thing as 4 over 1. So our new perpendicular slope is going to be negative 1/4. And if it's going to be passing through the midpoint, then I'm going to do similar to what we did earlier. I'm going to use my y value of 1, my slope of negative 1/4, my x value of 1 in order to find a y-intercept. So why don't you either go to your calculator or mental math, do the work with the fractions and figure out your y-intercept, and then we can write the equation. If you're doing your math correctly, even if it's with the help of the calculator, you will get your y-intercept at 1.25. So when you write the equation, it's negative 1/4 x plus 1.25. So what type of line did we just find? Well, it was perpendicular to the original and went through the midpoints. So we found the perpendicular bisector because the lines have opposite reciprocal slopes. And it passes through the midpoint. So that's what a perpendicular bisector is. It passes through the midpoint at a right angle. All right, so how do we find the equation of a perpendicular bisector? Well, the two things you need are the slope to make it perpendicular and the midpoint to make it bisect. And you use those two things to write the equation. Okay, so find the midpoint of the segment with endpoints 3, -1, and -5, 1. And then when you're done, find the slope of the same segment. And then we're going to write the equation of the line perpendicular to the segment from part A and passing through the midpoint in part B. And that's the equation of the perpendicular bisector. So do those things and then come back and we'll see how you did. So after doing the correct work, you should have a midpoint of -1, 0. You should have a slope of the given line. Sorry about that. The slope of the given line is -1/4, so that your perpendicular slope will be 4. And our midpoint was -1, 0. So we are going to use the y value of 0, our slope of +4, our x value of -1 to find the y-intercept, which will be 4. So then the equation of our perpendicular bisector, slope of 4, y-intercept of 4, y equals 4x plus 4. So pause the video, take a moment, write the equation of the perpendicular bisector of the segment having the endpoints -2, 1 and 4, 7. So find the midpoint, find the slope, take the perpendicular slope, find the y-intercept, write the equation. So pause the video, do that, and I'll show you if you're right or not. When all is said and done, you should have the equation y equals -x plus 5. If that didn't work for you, then go back and check your steps and see what error was made, or contact me and we'll talk about it. So now you're going to go off and practice, work on the problem set, and I will see you soon. Be good, be safe, and take care of each other. Bye-bye.